Princess Yeren stood before her father's throne with her hands clenched at her sides and anger burning in her violet eyes. "A human?" she demanded, her voice echoing through the crystal halls of the Valari Palace. Emperor Taiwan remained seated, his expression calm as he watched his youngest daughter struggle to contain her fury. "You survived an assassination attempt 3 days ago," he replied in a measured tone, "and I will not risk losing you again. So you assign me a primitive from a death world?" Yeren shook her head in disbelief. "This is an insult." "Father, this is protection," the Emperor corrected her. "Humans are the most effective bodyguards in the galaxy. And Sergeant Ji-hoon Park comes with the highest recommendations from the Galactic Security Council." Yeren wanted to argue more, but she knew that look in her father's eyes. The decision had been made. She turned and walked out of the throne room without another word, her silver robes flowing behind her like water. The Valari were an ancient and proud species, known throughout the galaxy for their beauty, their intelligence, and their political power. They lived for centuries, mastered technologies that other species could barely comprehend, and built an empire that spanned 1,000 worlds. Humans, by contrast, were newcomers to the galactic stage. They came from Earth, a brutal planet filled with predators, extreme weather, and constant danger. The galaxy called such places death worlds, and the creatures that survived them were viewed with a mixture of fear and contempt. Yeren had never met a human before, but she had heard the stories. They were violent, emotional, and lived for barely a century before their bodies failed them. What could such a creature possibly offer her? She found out the next morning when Sergeant Ji-hoon Park arrived at the palace. He was shorter than she expected, with dark hair cut close to his head and brown eyes that seemed to notice everything at once. Wore a simple black uniform without any decoration, and he carried himself with a stillness that felt almost unnatural. "Your Highness," he said, bowing his head slightly, "I am Sergeant Ji-hoon Park, and I have been assigned as your personal protection officer." His voice was quiet and controlled, showing no emotion whatsoever. Yeren looked him up and down with obvious disdain. "I did not ask for you," she told him coldly. "I am aware of that. Your Highness, I do not want you here." "I understand." She waited for him to say something more, to defend himself or try to win her approval. Instead, he simply stood there, watching her with those dark eyes that revealed nothing. It was infuriating. "Do you have nothing else to say?" She demanded. Ji-hoon considered the question for a moment before responding. "My job is to keep you alive, Your Highness, and your approval is not required for me to do that job." Yeren felt her cheeks flush with anger. No one spoke to her this way. She was the daughter of an emperor, the heir to 1,000 worlds, and this human dared to dismiss her feelings as irrelevant. "We shall see how long you last," she said through clenched teeth. And then she turned and walked away. Ji-hoon followed at a respectful distance, his footsteps nearly silent on the crystal floor. Over the next several days, Yeren did everything she could to make his job difficult. She changed her schedule without warning, moved through the palace at random, and refused to tell him where she was going or what she was doing through it all. Ji-hoon remained calm and professional. He never complained, never showed frustration, and never fell behind, no matter how quickly she moved. The courtiers whispered about him as he passed. They called him a pet and a savage, and made jokes about his short lifespan and primitive origins. Ji-hoon ignored them all as if they did not exist. On the 5th night, Yeren could not sleep. She walked to her balcony and looked out at the twin moons that hung over the capital city. The night air was cool against her skin, and she stood there for a long time, thinking about her mother who had died in the same attack that nearly claimed her own life. When she finally turned to go back inside, she noticed something strange. Ji-hoon was standing at his post by her chamber door, exactly where he had been when she went to bed hours ago. He had not moved, he had not sat down, he had not even closed his eyes. Do you never sleep? She asked before she could stop her. So Ji-hoon glanced at her briefly before returning his gaze to the corridor ahead. Not while I am on duty. Your Highness, that is impossible. And even Valari require rest. Humans can suppress their need for sleep when necessary, he explained. It is a survival adaptation from our evolutionary history. Yaren stared at him with new curiosity. Your planet must be truly terrible to require such abilities. Earth has its challenges, Ji-hoon admitted, but it is also beautiful in its own way. There was something in his voice when he spoke of his home world. A softness that Yaren had not heard before. She found herself wanting to ask more. To understand this strange creature who stood guard over her without complaint or expectation. But pride held her tongue. Good night, Sergeant, she said instead, and retreated back into her chambers as she lay in bed. She could not stop thinking about him standing there in the darkness, alone and awake, watching over her while the rest of the palace slept. Perhaps humans were not quite as primitive as she had believed. Perhaps there was more to Sergeant Ji-hoon Park than she had assumed. She closed her eyes and drifted into an uneasy sleep, dreaming of dark eyes that saw everything and revealed nothing. The diplomatic vessel Starlight Harmony cut through the void of space like a silver blade, carrying Princess Yaren toward the neutral station where trade negotiations would determine the future of 3 star systems set in her private quarters. Reviewing the documents her advisors had prepared, but her eyes kept drifting to the window where stars stretched into infinite lines of light. Ji-hoon stood near the door as always. Silent and watchful. 3 weeks had passed since his arrival, and Yaren found herself growing accustomed to his presence. She still did not approve of the arrangement, but she had stopped actively trying to make his life difficult. There was something almost comforting about his stillness, his certainty, the way he seemed completely focused on a single purpose. You have been standing for 6 hours, she observed without looking up from her documents. Yes, Your Highness. Does that not cause you discomfort? I have experienced worse. Yaren set down her data tablet and turned to face him fully. What was the worst? She asked. Genuinely curious. June was quiet for a moment, and she thought he might refuse to answer. Basic training on Earth, he finally said. 72 hours without sleep, carrying full equipment through a jungle filled with creatures that wanted to eat us. That sounds horrific. It was excellent preparation for this assignment. Yaren blinked in surprise, and then she realized he was making a joke. The corner of her mouth twitched upward before she could stop it. Are you comparing me to jungle predators, Sergeant? I would never be so disrespectful, Your Highness. But there was the faintest hint of warmth in his eyes, and Yaren found herself smiling despite her best efforts to remain cold. Negotiations on the neutral station were tense from the very beginning. Representatives from dozens of species had gathered to discuss mining rights in a newly discovered asteroid field, and everyone wanted the largest share for themselves. Yaren represented the Valari Empire with grace and intelligence, navigating the complex web of alliances and rivalries with practiced skill. Ji-hoon remained at her side throughout, a silent shadow that other delegates eyed with nervous curiosity. Humans had a reputation in the galaxy, and not all of it was flattering. They were known as survivors, as fighters, as creatures who refused to die, even when the odds were impossible. Some species admired them for this, others feared them. On the second day of negotiations, a delegate from the Corvin Syndicate grew frustrated with Yaren's refusal to accept his terms. It was a large creature with 4 arms and scales the color of dried blood, and he towered over the princess by at least 2 feet. You Valari think you are so superior, he growled, reaching out to grab her arm. Perhaps you need a lesson in respect. What happened next occurred so fast that most observers missed it entirely. One moment, the Corvin was standing over Yaren with his clawed hand wrapped around her wrist. The Next moment, he was face down on the floor with Ji-hoon kneeling on his back and twisting one of his arms at an angle that looked extremely painful. The entire exchange took less than 2 seconds. Release the princess immediately, Ji-hoon said in a calm voice that somehow carried more threat than any shout could have done. Coven tried to struggle, but found he could not move without risking a broken limb. This is an outrage, he roared. I am a diplomatic representative, and she is under my protection, Ji-hoon replied. If you touch her again, I will remove the offending limb. And that is not a threat, but a promise. He released the Corvin and stepped back, positioning himself between the delegate and Yeren. His hands were empty, and he had not drawn any weapon. He had not needed to. The other delegates stared in stunned silence. Valari, renowned for their speed and reflexes. But this human had moved faster than any of them could follow. The Corvin scrambled to his feet and retreated, humiliated and furious, but unwilling to test the human further. Later that evening, Yeren summoned Ji-hoon to her quarters on the station. You could have killed him, she said once they were alone. Yes. Why did you not? Ji-hoon considered the question with the same careful attention he gave to everything. He was not worth the paperwork. He answered, Oh, the war his people would have started. Yeren studied his face, searching for something she could not quite name. What does protection mean to you? She asked quietly. Everything, Ji-hoon said without hesitation. On Earth, we have a saying that some things are worth dying for, and protecting those in our care is at the top of that list. Even someone who treats you as I have. Your Highness, my feelings are irrelevant to my duty. And even if they were not, you have treated me no worse than many others. He paused, and something flickered in those dark eyes. Besides, I have seen the pressure you carry on your shoulders, and I understand why you resented my presence. So there is nothing to forgive. Yeren felt a strange tightness in her chest. No one had ever spoken to her this way, with such honesty and such lack of expectation. Tell me about Earth, she heard herself say. Tell me about your home. And so he did. He told her about blue oceans and green forests, about cities that stretched toward the sky, and mountains capped with white snow. He told her about his family, his parents who still lived in a small town near the sea, his younger sister who wanted to become a doctor. He spoke of Earth not as a death world, but as a home. Flawed and dangerous, but loved all the same. When he finished, Yeren realized she was smiling again. She did not try to hide it this time. The grand celebration of unity was the most prestigious event in the galactic calendar, bringing together representatives from every major species in a display of peace and cooperation. Princess Yeren arrived at the orbital station wearing a gown of liquid silver that seemed to flow around her like starlight made solid. She was beautiful, elegant, and every inch the royal air of a powerful empire. Beside her, Ji-hoon looked distinctly uncomfortable in his formal uniform. It was the same black as always, but decorated now with silver trim and the ceremonial sash of a royal protector. He tugged at his collar when he thought no one was watching. You look like you are being strangled, Yeren whispered as they entered the main hall. I feel like I am being strangled, Ji-hoon admitted. This collar is trying to kill me. Consider it revenge for all the times you have stood outside my door at uncomfortable hours. I was protecting you at those hours, and now your collar is protecting your neck from breathing properly. So we are even. There was that hint of warmth in his eyes again, the one Yeren had learned to look for over the past month. Their relationship had shifted in ways neither of them openly acknowledged. She no longer treated him as an unwanted burden. He no longer maintained such rigid professional distance. They talked now, really talked, about their worlds and their lives and their dreams. The celebration was a maze of politics and performance. Yeren danced with delegates, made polite conversation with rivals, and navigated the treacherous waters of galactic diplomacy with practiced grace throughout it all. Ji-hoon remained close, watching the crowd with those eyes that missed nothing. It was near midnight when a server approached. "You're in with a tray of drinks, compliments of the Valari delegation." "Your Highness," the server said, offering a crystal glass filled with pale blue liquid. Urine reached for the glass, but Ji-hoon's hand was faster. "Allow me to check it first," he said smoothly, taking the glass from the tray. "That is hardly necessary," Yaren protested. "It is from my own delegation. Protocol, Your Highness." He raised the glass to his lips and took a small sip. Holding the liquid in his mouth for a moment before swallowing, the server bowed and disappeared into the crowd. Ji-hoon handed the glass back to Yaren with a nod. "It appears safe," the knight continued. And Yaren soon forgot about the incident entirely. It was only hours later, when she had retired to her quarters on the station, that something went wrong. There was a knock at her door. Urgent and frantic, she opened it to find one of Ji-hoon's fellow human guards standing there with fear in his eyes. "Your Highness, you need to come quickly." And Sergeant Park has collapsed. Yaren's heart seemed to stop in her chest. She ran through the corridors in her nightclothes, not caring who saw her or what they thought. She found Ji-hoon in the medical bay, lying on a table while doctors swarmed around him. His face was pale and covered in sweat, and his breathing was shallow and labored. "What happened?" Yaren demanded, grabbing the nearest physician. "Poison," the doctor replied. "A delayed action toxin designed to avoid detection. And it appears the sergeant ingested it approximately 4 hours ago." 4 hours ago, the realization hit Yaren like a physical blow. "He switched the glasses," she whispered. "He drank my poison." "That would appear to be the case, Your Highness." Yaren pushed past the doctors and took Ji-hoon's hand in her own. It was burning with fever. "You foolish human," she said, her voice breaking. "Why did you not tell me?" Ji-hoon's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. "Had to be sure," he mumbled. "Had to keep you safe by dying yourself." Acceptable exchange. Tears she did not know. She had began to fall down. Yaren's cheeks. She had never cried for anyone outside her family before. "You are not allowed to die," she told him fiercely. "That is a royal command." Ji-hoon tried to smile, but it twisted into a grimace of pain. "Never disobeyed an order before," he managed. "Would hate to start now?" The doctors worked through the night, fighting to counteract the poison that was destroying Ji-hoon from within. Yaren refused to leave his side. She held his hand as he drifted in and out of consciousness, speaking words of encouragement she was not sure he could hear in his delirium. Ji-hoon talked about things he never would have shared while awake. He spoke of loneliness, of feeling like an outsider among species who viewed him as primitive. Spoke of his mother and how much he missed her cooking. He spoke of Yaren, though he did not seem to realize she was listening. "She is so bright," he murmured at one point, "like starlight given form, and I'm just a shadow meant to keep her safe." "You are more than that," Yaren whispered back, squeezing his hand. "You are so much more than that." By morning, the doctors announced that he would survive human biology. They explained with amazement. Had remarkable resilience, the same adaptations that allowed humans to survive their death. World had given Ji-hoon's body the strength to fight off a poison that would have killed any Valari within hours. When Ji-hoon finally woke properly, he found Yaren asleep in a chair beside his bed. She was still holding his hand. He did not pull away. The journey back to the Valari homeworld should have been peaceful. Ji-hoon was recovering well, though the doctors insisted he remain on light duty for at least another week. Yaren found excuses to visit him constantly, bringing him reports to review and meals from the ship's kitchen. Neither of them talked about what had happened at the celebration, about the poison or the hand-holding or the tears, but something had changed between them, something that hung in the air like electricity before a storm. "You did not have to bring this yourself," Ji-hoon said as Yaren set a tray of food on his bedside table. "The servants would have delivered it." Perhaps I wanted an excuse to escape the endless diplomatic messages, Yeren replied, settling into the chair that had become her unofficial seat. Or perhaps you enjoy my company. Do not flatter yourself, Sergeant. But she was smiling as she said it. And so was he. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while. Ji-hoon eating slowly while Yeren pretended to read through documents on her data tablet finally. She set the tablet aside and looked at him directly. Why did you really take this assignment? She asked, and I want the truth. Not the professional answer you give everyone else. Ji-hoon set down his utensils and met her gaze. I took it because I needed to prove something, he admitted. To myself, to my family, to everyone who said humans would never be more than soldiers and laborers in this galaxy. And have you proven it? I thought I had. But then I nearly died protecting a princess who would not even look at me when I first arrived. Yeren flinched at the reminder of her earlier cruelty. I was wrong about you, she said quietly. I was wrong about many things. We all have prejudices, Your Highness. And the important thing is whether we are willing to see past them. Yeren, he blinked in confusion. My name is Yeren, she clarified. When we are alone, you may use it. Something shifted in Ji-hoon's expression. A softening that made him look younger and more vulnerable. Yeren, he repeated. As if testing the sound of it, she liked the way he said it. She liked it very much. The attack came 3 days later. When they were still 2 days from the Valari homeworld, Yeren was in the observation lounge when the ship shuddered violently and alarms began to scream. Red lights flashed in the corridors as she ran toward the bridge, only to find chaos waiting for her. We are being boarded, the captain shouted. A strike team came through the cargo bay, and they are fighting their way toward the royal quarters. Ji-hoon appeared at her side seconds later, still pale from his recovery, but moving with the deadly purpose she had seen on the neutral station. We need to get you to the emergency shuttle, he said. Taking her arm, I will not run from my own ship. Yeren, these people want to kill you, and I cannot protect you if you insist on being stubborn. Then protect me here. Before Ji-hoon could argue further, the doors to the observation lounge burst open. 5 figures in dark armor poured through, weapons raised and targeting lasers painting red dots across Yeren's silver gown. Ji-hoon moved without hesitation. He tackled the first attacker before the enemy could fire. Breaking the creature's weapon arm with a sickening crack, he rolled to his feet and kicked the second attacker's legs out from under them, then grabbed their falling body and used it as a shield against the third enemy's shots. Everything happened so fast that Yeren could barely follow. Ji-hoon was a blur of controlled violence. Using every object in the room as a weapon, he broke bones, disarmed opponents, and created space between the attackers and his princess with the brutal efficiency of someone who had trained for this their entire life. But he was still weak from the poisoned fourth attacker caught him with a blow to the ribs, and Yeren heard something crack. Ji-hoon staggered but did not fall. He grabbed the attacker's arm and twisted, flipping the creature over his shoulder and into the 5th enemy. Both went down hard. For a moment, it seemed like the fight was over. Then the 5th attacker rose, pulling a plasma pistol from a hidden holster and aiming it directly at Ji-hoon's chest. Yeren did not think. She grabbed a fallen weapon from the floor and fired. The shot was not perfect, but it was enough to send the attacker sprawling backward. Wounded but alive, Ji-hoon turned to stare at her in shock. Yeren, what are you doing? What does it look like? She replied, her voice shaking but determined. I am protecting my bodyguard. More attackers could be heard in the corridor, and Ji-hoon was swaying on his feet, blood dripping from a cut on his forehead. Yeren positioned herself in front of him, weapon raised, refusing to let him face the danger alone. You should run, he said weakly. I am done running. This is not your fight. You are wrong, she told him, her voice steady now. Anything that threatens you is absolutely my fight. The reinforcements arrived moments later. Valari guards pouring through the secondary entrance and overwhelming the remaining attackers, but Yaren did not lower her weapon until she was certain the danger had passed when she finally turned back to Ji-hoon. He was looking at her with an expression she had never seen before. "You could have died." He whispered, "So could you. That is different." "No," Yaren said firmly, reaching out to touch his face. "It is not different at all. Because humans are not the only ones who protect what matters." Ji-hoon closed his eyes and leaned into her touch. He did not argue anymore. The crystal halls of the Valari Palace had never felt so full of tension. Emperor Taiwan sat on his throne, surrounded by advisors and nobles who whispered among themselves like a nest of disturbed insects. Before him stood his daughter, still bearing the faint bruises from the attack. And beside her stood the human who had nearly died protecting her twice. "The faction responsible has been identified," the Emperor announced, his voice cold with barely contained fury. "They sought to destabilize our empire by eliminating my heir, and they will face the full weight of Valari justice." A murmur of approval rippled through the assembled court. "But there is another matter to address," Taiwan continued, his gaze settling on Ji-hoon. "Sergeant Park, step forward." Ji-hoon moved with the careful precision of someone still recovering from his injuries. He stood before the Emperor and bowed his head in respect. "You were assigned to protect my daughter," Taiwan said, "and you exceeded every expectation placed upon you. I was simply doing my duty." "Your Majesty, you drank poison meant for her without hesitation, and you fought through a team of assassins while still recovering from that poisoning. So do not insult my intelligence by calling that simple duty." The Emperor rose from his throne and descended the steps until he stood directly in front of Ji-hoon. In his hands was a medallion of pure crystal, carved with the symbols of the royal house. "This is the Star of Valari," Taiwan explained. "It has not been awarded to anyone outside our species in over 3,000 years. He placed the medallion around Ji-hoon's neck, and the court fell into stunned silence. "You have proven that humans are not the primitive creatures many believe them to be," the Emperor declared. "You have shown courage, loyalty, and honor that would put many Valari to shame, and for that, you have my eternal gratitude." Ji-hoon looked up at the Emperor with surprise in his dark eyes. "Thank you, Your Majesty." "Do not thank me yet," Taiwan said with a slight smile. "My daughter wishes to speak, and I suspect her words will be even more surprising than mine." Yaren stepped forward, and the court held its collective breath. She was still in her travel clothes, having refused to change before this audience. There was fire in her violet eyes. The same fire Ji-hoon had first seen when she learned she was being assigned a human bodyguard, but it was directed at the court now, not at him. "For too long, we Valari have looked down upon other species," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast hall. "We call ourselves enlightened, yet we treat humans as servants and tools, valued only for their ability to fight and die in our service." The nobles shifted uncomfortably, but no one dared to interrupt. "Sergeant Ji-hoon Park has taught me how wrong we have been," Yaren continued. "He has shown me that humans feel as deeply as we do, perhaps more deeply because they know their time is limited. And he has shown me that loyalty and love are not weakened by a shorter lifespan, but strengthened by it." She turned to face the court directly. "From this day forward, humans will be recognized as valued allies of the Valari Empire, not as lesser beings to be used and discarded. And anyone who treats them otherwise will answer to me personally." The declaration sent shockwaves through the assembled nobles. But Yaren was not finished. She turned back to Ji-hoon and took his hands in her own. "Right there in front of the entire court, there is something else I must say," she told him, her voice softer now. "Something I should have said days ago. Yaren, you do not have to do this here." "Yes, I do," because I am tired of hiding. And I am tired of pretending that what I feel is anything less than what it is. She took a deep breath. I do not want you to leave, and I do not mean as my bodyguard, because I want you to stay as my partner, my equal, my chosen one. Gasps echoed through the Halavalari princess. Choosing a human was unprecedented, unthinkable, and yet here she stood. Offering her heart to a man from a death world, without shame or hesitation, Ji-hoon stared at her for a long moment. His expression unreadable. Valari lived for centuries, he said quietly. I will be gone in a few decades at most. Then we will make every moment count. Your people will not accept this. My people will learn to accept what I decide. And if they cannot, that is their failure, not ours. Yaren, I am just a soldier. You are the man who drank poison for me, she corrected him fiercely. You are the man who fought assassins while barely able to stand. And you are the man who taught me that strength is not measured in centuries lived, but in how fiercely we protect what we love. She squeezed his hands tightly. I love you. Ji-hoon and I do not care how many years we have together, because I only care that we spend them together. The hall was silent as everyone waited for Ji-hoon's response. He looked at this impossible woman, this princess of an alien empire, who had seen past every wall he had built around himself. She was starlight given form, and he was just a shadow. But maybe shadows and starlight belong together after all. I stopped seeing this as a job a long time ago, he admitted. And I stopped seeing you as just an assignment even longer before that. Is that a yes? That is a yes. Yaren pulled him into an embrace right there before the throne, and after a moment of shock, the court erupted into applause. Not everyone approved. Some nobles whispered that this was madness, that humans were too fragile and too different to join the royal family, but others saw something beautiful in the union, a promise of change and growth for an empire that had been stagnant for too long. Word of the human who captured a Valari princess's heart spread across the galaxy like wildfire. They called it a fairy tale, an impossible romance between two species who should have had nothing in common, but those who knew them understood the truth. Ji-hoon and Yaren had found in each other something rare and precious, not a love built on power or politics, but on sacrifice and understanding and the stubborn refusal to give up on each other. Years later, when historians wrote about this moment, they would note that it changed everything. Humans were no longer seen as primitive deathworlders, but as partners and equals. The alliance between Earth and Valari grew stronger with each passing decade, built on the foundation of one soldier and one princess who chose each other against all odds. But that night, as Ji-hoon and Yaren stood on the balcony of the palace and looked up at the twin moons, none of that mattered. They were simply two people in love, holding hands in the darkness. They say humans are primitive and short-lived and reckless, Yaren murmured. Leaning against his shoulder, Ji-hoon smiled and wrapped his arm around her. What else did they say? She looked up at him, violet eyes shining with the light of 1,000 stars. They never mentioned that humans love with the same ferocity they fight with. And perhaps that is the most dangerous thing about them. He kissed her then, soft and gentle and full of promise, and somewhere across the galaxy, species who had once dismissed humanity as primitive began to understand that they had been wrong all along. Humans were not dangerous because of their strength or their resilience or their ability to survive. Impossible odds, humans were dangerous because once they decided something was worth protecting, nothing in the universe could stop them, nothing at all.